And I also wanted to make mention that today's financial presentation is being brought to you by United Way of Monmouth and Ocean Counties. So Siobhan, welcome to our virtual Lunch and Learn.
Hello everyone.
Welcome, Siobhan.
Okay, Siobhan, so the stage is all yours. We'll see you in a little bit.
See you later.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now.
Yes.
Put this up here. Okay. So hello everyone. My name is Siobhan Connolly, as you just heard. I'm from Garden State Trust Company. I'm a trust officer and vice president for the company. And Garden State, just a little background about Garden State Trust Company. We are a independent trust company providing trust services and investment management, as well as estate planning and settlement services. We're located in Toms River currently, and answer your phone calls or any questions that you might have, and you'll get my contact information. So at the end of the presentation, if you have questions that you didn't have a chance to ask during our time here, you can reach out to me at any point using phone numbers and ask me any questions with regard to what you learned today. Okay. We're going to talk today a little bit about controlling your finances, getting control of your finances, as well as controlling your finances, which in today's environment may or may not be easier, depending on the circumstances and what COVID-19 may have done and affected your finances during this period. So let's just dive in. One of the couple of the things here listed on my presentation, hopefully you're seeing it. Some of the things I'll touch on is the idea of creating online accounts to make sure that you're have better control over those finances, or more readily aware of you know, your investments, as well as your bank account information, and keeping track of that information. And I've found that not only do the online accounts give you more accuracy and understanding of your spending habits month to month, but also in looking at your investment portfolios, your 401k, your IRA, and getting more comfortable with looking at that on a regular basis. And also, depending on where those investments are held, a lot of the websites where you're going online to look at your accounts provide incredible resources now, especially if you have an account at Fidelity, say your IRA is at Fidelity Investments. And even if you don't have an account there, you can log on to their website and find wonderful tools in terms of retirement and being on track with your retirement, being on track with your spending to make sure that your assets last for your lifetime. So between, you know, Fidelity or Charles Schwab or Vanguard, there are some wonderful resources out there, and they're very user-friendly. And so you can go out and look for those resources to help you help yourself in terms of understanding your finances. We're going to talk about how you can use healthcare savings to increase your income that you retain annually, and identify some of those programs and resources that are out there for retired persons or over 65, and also how to plan for those those future needs. One of the things I was just going to bring up today, because I've done presentations in the past for SCAN as a financial person, but also since I'm also on the board of SCAN. And one of these pioneers, as we call them, for the baby boomer generation is something called solo agers. And they don't fit the traditional model of family, where you have the children mostly will help parents and family members navigating the obstacles of aging. So for baby boomers, 20 to 35% won't have spouses, siblings, or children to rely upon in their old age. And even those with children often live at a great distance from those children. And so a large percentage of solo agers are also women, since women have a longer life expectancy than men. By 2050, the global population of people aged 60 and older will rise to 2 billion, up from 900 million in 2015. And so every day in the United States, 10,000 people turn 65. Between 1990 and 2013, global life expectancy rose by about 6 years to 71.5. And a child born in 2011 has a 1 in 3 chance of living to her 100th birthday. I know, as far as our clientele, that I have had clientele who have lived to 105. And so this is not an unusual occurrence any longer. And what does that mean for your finances and making sure that things last for your lifetime? So here are some of the questions that you might want to consider. Do you pay the bills in your household? And if you don't, are you aware of what your annual bills are? And especially in the baby boomer generation and those who have achieved retirement age, 65 and older, especially going up to upwards of 75 to 80 years old. Women in that generation didn't generally pay the bills, or they paid some of the household bills, but they didn't know the larger extent to their investment portfolios or what their assets were. So with you, your partner, or even if you do have children nearby, do you review your statements of bank accounts and investment accounts on a regular basis? Are you aware of what those investments are and if they're income producing or if they are for growth? And what are the income tax implications of those types of investments? Are you aware where your important documents are? Are they in a place that's accessible to someone if something should happen to you? Do you have life insurance or annuities? Are those policies available to people who would need to get their hands on those if you were unable to tell them where they were? And how are they titled? We don't recommend that you keep those types of documents in safe deposit boxes because if nobody else is on that safe deposit box, they will not have access to that safe deposit box. How are they titled? Do you understand how your investments are titled? Are they joint investments? Are they only in your name? Are they transfer on death designations, meaning that as soon as you pass, that those titled instruments go directly to your beneficiaries, or do they go to your estate? And that can also have tax implications and probate implications as well. But also, most importantly, your POA, your power of attorney. Is that someplace that's easily accessible? Does the power of attorney for you, your husband for each other, and then an alternate named, do they have access to that document? So those are the things that, want to make sure that those for your future, that is all in a place where it's accessible to those that need to access it. And if your answer is no to any of these questions, you should think about what happens next. So some of your to-do list: review your finances. What type of investments do you have? How are they invested? What is your annual income? What other income sources do you have? Social Security, pension, IRA, any annuities that pay to you on a monthly or quarterly basis? Are any of these lost upon your spouse's death? And how will you make up that income if that were to occur? So getting back to today, what are your monthly expenses? Does your income cover your monthly expenses? Does that income grow with inflation? Your Social Security does have an increase due to inflation. Sometimes I think in some years it's actually remained flat, but in some years it has increased. And do you account for that in your retirement in terms of the increased costs of utilities and taxes, and how are you going to account for that as the years go by? Do you have a cash reserve for unexpected bills or expenses? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And how do you build that cash reserve? How do bills get paid if you have a serious medical event? So what are your monthly expenses? Does your income cover those monthly expenses? How do you make sure that happens and that it'll continue on into the future? So that we have soft expenses and hard expenses. Soft expenses are changing costs, and you have some control over what those costs are. Utilities, you can control somewhat what you spend on your utilities. You can't control the increases that happen, but there are, I know in New Jersey, you do have third-party delivery services that do change in terms of their cost structure, and you can bring that down annually by re-upping or changing those carriers, and it's marked on your bill when you receive your bill. They do tell you that there's options, and you can look into those options. And again, the internet is a great way to do that, to compare costs between those delivery options that actually can save you significantly over the course of a year. Credit card, obviously you have control over how much you spend on a monthly basis on your credit card, and your food and entertainment. Obviously you have control over that. And with COVID, we might be finding that you have really reduced those expenditures in terms of not going out to eat and not having be able to go to the movies or even on vacation. So a lot of those expenses might have been brought down during this time period. Hard expenses, you're looking at your mortgage, your rent, your real estate taxes. Those are things that are hard expenses, but there is some way to possibly find savings within those as well. Insurance, real estate insurance, as well as your medical insurance. There are options that you can look into. I know that real estate insurance, there are brokers out there that you can contact that you don't owe them a fee. They're paid by the carriers, but they will shop around for you and find better premiums for you. So, and those are on an annual basis that you can revisit to find some savings. And how do you have a cash reserve for unexpected bills? Some people out there may already be thinking about that, and what they recommend is that you have a cash reserve of 6 to 8 months of expenses. Look at income versus expenses, what's coming in and what's going out. And is there a way that you can trim that so that, you're monthly are taking some of your income and putting it into your savings account to reserve for a rainy day, for larger expenses. It may be household expenses, or it may be medical crisis expenses. You can look at your investments and see, what's qualified and unqualified if you need to tap any of those investments in the future. So the cash reserve doesn't have to be cash in your savings account. It could be money in your investment account that can be liquidated quickly to be utilized, or that you keep some sort of cash reserve within those investment accounts. Between your qualified and unqualified, there's tax implications. So if you needed to take more than your required minimum distribution from, say, an IRA or your 401k, that would be you would be incurring income tax on any additional money that you took out from your RMD. But if you have an unqualified account, your regular investment, investment management account, that is already after tax. So if you had to liquidate anything, you would be taking a capital gains distribution rather than a income distribution, and capital gains tends to be less, 15% on long-term capital gains distributions. So you want to look where you'll be taking that money from. That also can help in terms of making sure that you're not using money you don't need to use or losing money to taxes. How do your bills get paid if you have a medical event? So within your, if you are on Medicare, there are plans, and you have a re-enrollment every year, so that you want to look at those plans that you currently have, if they're still functioning properly for you, or do you need to also add maybe a Medicare Advantage plan for those costs that are not covered by Medicaid Part A or B, and you can add one of those to your arsenal, so to speak, to cover those kind of costs so that you're not paying those out of pocket. And then there's also Medicare D, which is your prescription plan. Make sure that you have one. Even if you don't have a lot of prescriptions at any given point, you want to make sure that you add that to your arsenal as you age, where you may be incurring more and more prescriptions for chronic illnesses. And long-term care plans. Some of you may have already looked into that and may actually have a wonderful long-term care plan. That would be going into the future. The idea that if you were ever to need to bring in-home care to your house, those expenses would be covered. Or if you were going to a long-term care facility, that they would be paying a portion of those. Those plans today don't look like they did 10, 15 years ago, where they were very robust. Now they're not quite as robust, and they are very expensive. And if you don't get them when you're young, they can be extraordinarily and almost price you out. You may not be able to purchase those at this point. So you want to just think about how you're going to get there, how you're going to find your Zen and feel comfortable and have peace of mind for not only your expenses today, but going forward. And getting control of that, being aware of everything, can actually be very freeing, you know, to your state of mind as well. One of the things that in going back to discuss, I know that with COVID, if you've had you know, financial difficulties due to the pandemic, there are things that you can do for relief that were under the CARES Act that was implemented back in March. And one of those is through your IRA, you can receive up to $100,000 from your IRA without incurring a penalty if you're over 59 and a half. So you can look into your carrier, whoever your, wherever your IRA is held, your custodian. You can find out what options you have there. But if you are experiencing financial difficulties from loss of a job or from having COVID, you do have that ability to take additional funds from an IRA. You also, if you're not having financial difficulty, you can not take your required minimum distribution this year. And that would save on your income tax. So if you're in a great position like that, not to have to do that, that's also some ways to, you know, keep some savings in your pocket going forward. Let me see here. Oh, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about also is there's the senior freeze for real estate taxes. So if you are 65 or older or disabled, if you live in New Jersey continuously since 2008 and you've owned your home since 2015, you might qualify for something, the senior freeze real estate tax deduction, which not many people know about. That you're familiar with the homestead, but the homestead has been frozen and nobody's receiving that, I think, since last year and going forward this year. But this is another option. You can create what is known as a baseline for your taxes. And after 2 years, the increase over whatever your baseline was can be refunded to you. So if you go to newjersey.gov and you look under property tax relief, online, you can look into that to see if you are eligible. There's also income requirements. So I think in 2018 it was $89,000, and it went up in 2019 to $91,000. So you can look into possibly receiving some tax relief, property tax relief from that. Now we can talk a little bit about, once you have a handle on your current finances, you can make informed decisions, but maybe preparing for incompetency and or a long-term health crisis, and what are your options? Who is your POA, and do I need a trust? So make sure that you have executed a POA for you and your spouse. You can be each other's, but then you want to make sure that you name an alternate. And for some people who, if your children don't live close by, or if you don't have children, that's a difficult decision. So you really want to make sure that you have that put in place. The last thing you want is the state appointing a guardian for you because you don't have someone that you trust appointed to take care of you in your incompetency, or if you have a debilitating health emergency. there's also the idea that you could create trusts. We can talk a little bit more about that. I don't know where I am on time. How do I want to live when I need more help?
Siobhan, it's Mary Beth. I just want to let you know that Dr. Eisenberg looked like he may have an emergency, so you may have the ability to take his time slot. So if you want to check back in with me.
That's a lot of time.
Well, you don't need the whole thing, but my point is if you run over, you're fine, okay?
Where are we at?
So we are at 5:21.
Okay.
Well, you know what? Monmouth Medical is just texting me. They're on the phone with him now. So I'll give you an update in a little bit.
Okay. Jump in whenever you can. Okay. So getting back to how do I want to live as I age and when I need more help, there are some great options there. I know a lot of people like the idea of staying in their home. So you want to plan for those long-term options of possibly bringing help into your home, long-term care. Medicare does not cover in-house aides that are not necessarily nursing, but just helping you to be there for your daily needs. So you want to think about those costs and how will you manage that. That kind of leads into some Medicaid planning, and that's where trust can come in. If there is enough assets there or your home, if you're trying to preserve for your family, for your children, if you want to preserve some assets, you need to do some Medicaid planning. The Medicaid planning really needs to happen 5 years before any need for Medicaid would occur. So that is really long-term planning that has to be done well in advance. There are options also within New Jersey, especially in this area where we have such a high retirement population. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of these names: Crestwood, Harrogate, the Pines, and then up in Tinton Falls, I think it's Seabreeze, I think it is. Seabrook. And I should know that because we go there all the time for scan. I just lost it in my head. Seabrook. So these are wonderful options that give you a buy-in to an independent apartment that you can purchase for independent living, and then transition as you get older into the assisted living and into their nursing facility. And with the buy-in, you are drastically reducing those costs that come later. So you're paying upfront, and then when if you do need assisted living or transition into the nursing facility, your costs for those services will be drastically reduced than if you are living in your home and having a medical event and then need to be moved to a long-term care facility. So, those are options that are worth looking into. And if you're planning to stay here in New Jersey in your retirement. And we've had several clients that have transitioned into those places. And I have to say that, people have an idea of those places as a place you go to grow old, but they're very, very vibrant places. And I have clients that have remained in their home, which can get very isolating as you age, especially in the winter months here. Whereas some of the places where you have, like in say a Crestwood, where you can leave your apartment and go down to the general facility where there's constantly, presentations and activities, and you passing everybody in the hallway and saying hello, and it's much more social environment. And I find that people do very well and longer periods of time in those types of living arrangements. Unfortunately, during COVID, we see, the downside of that is where those people have not been able to socialize, have been in some cases even locked down into their apartments, and it's been very isolating. I have some clients that have been going through that as well. And so, this time period has proven to be very difficult for people in those facilities. So I guess that would be something else to consider when you make those decisions. So just speaking on some of your investment options to make sure that you are aware of what your investments are and how they function, the idea of an annuity. CDs, I know were very popular starting in the 80s, but have since lost their luster with the very low tax environment that we have. That's another thing that you might want to consider in terms of if you still do have a mortgage, if you've looked into refinancing that mortgage because of the the low interest rate environment. You may actually find some large amount of savings there. And if you do have any kind of financial difficulty currently, that you might be able to refinance your mortgage and take out additional funds at this low interest rate, which would not even increase would still not even necessarily increase your monthly payment. So, those are the creative ways that you can think about finding new money if you have a need for that right now. The other thing is under your portfolio management, whether you have fixed income or growth or both. Obviously, the idea is you should have a very diversified portfolio so that, what we've looked at here is a lot of times as we get older, we always recommend with the shorter time horizon that you move more money into a fixed income instrument, bonds that pay interest and income to you on a regular basis rather than into the market where there's more volatility. But what we found in the low interest rate environment now is that there's not a lot to be gotten there in terms of income, and the growth that's happening within the market is where people are kind of rushing in to find some additional income and some growth for their investments. People tend to find, especially after the 2008 financial collapse, that they never really got back into the market, or if they did get back into the market, they're thinking back in March, there was the idea that, you wanted to get back out as everything fell, but we had a rather V-shaped recovery, at least in the stock market, not on the street in the everyday economy, but we had a V-shaped recovery in the market. So if you had put, like in 2008, if you had pulled out of the market when everything went down, you never actually recovered to try and get back in to catch the wave back up. And that happened in March. And so, there was, if you did, hopefully if you had spoken with your investment manager, or if you manage your own investments, that you didn't pull back too much on that and that you remained in the market. And so those are lessons for these fluctuations that we have on an annual basis or on every couple of years when we do have crisis or things happening that your instinct is to take yourself out of the market. But in the truth, when you take yourself out of the market, that means usually that you've missed the recovery as well. So those are just things to keep in mind for those of you with investment management accounts or with your 401k or IRA. In terms of things, thinking about your future, whether or not you want to consider a trust, if there's enough assets there to protect. And also, if you are solo ager, as I referred to earlier, or if your children don't live close by, the idea that you can create a revocable trust, combine other assets into that trust to kind of make things a little more streamlined. And then you have a trustee that's put in place that will manage those assets if you no longer can or do not wish to manage your financial life at any point. And so there's just more protection there. And, many people have considered that. And now with the other thing that's on the horizon, you have the possibility of a regime change. If Joe Biden is to win the election, there's many people who do have possibly significant assets out there that are looking to restructure their estate plan prior to the end of 2020, once the election happens and we have a winner, due to the fact that the estate tax rules could change on the federal level, as well as the what was I talking? Oh, sorry, talking longer than I was expecting to, as well as your capital gains tax, which may increase going into 2020 and into 2021, I should say, with the new president. It would take time for that to be implemented but those changes could go back to January 2021. So there are some, if you have that, those kinds of assets, that there's some planning that you might want to do before the end of this year to transfer some of the wealth, whether you want to do gift giving to children of assets that are highly appreciated, that you don't feel that you're going to need during your lifetime. There is also planning for husband and wife trusts that you can do for each other that would take some of those assets upon one of your death out of the estate of the second to die, and therefore would protect those assets going forward for your children from taxes, essentially. So there's a lot of planning tools out there that can help you both during your lifetime and then for any assets that you want to pass along to your heirs. So just giving you food for thought and how to go about that. And of course, if you are looking to change your estate plan, you really want to contact your attorney and make sure that you're discussing with them your individual situation. You don't want to get, there's no size fits all for people. And so you want to make sure that you're giving your attorney as much information as he needs to make sure that he's structuring the plan correctly for you. And that people think their estate plan is for their estate, but it's actually also for yourself as you grow older and may have diminished capacity. And so you want to make sure that there's plans in place to make sure that your finances as well as your own personal needs are met. So when can a trust be created? A trust can be created during your lifetime, like we just said, a revocable living trust, or it can be testamentary under your will. An irrevocable trust is the type of instrument that's used if you're doing some Medicaid planning. Medicaid planning meaning you're looking to remove assets from your that you would be considered having control over, that would be utilized for your health care if you were no longer able to take care of yourself. So the idea of an irrevocable trust is you're taking assets and you're putting them in a trust and you no longer have control over those assets. You can, however, still benefit from those assets and receive income from the trust. But those assets are not considered yours any longer. They're owned by the trust, and the trustee has possession of those assets. And so those are used for Medicaid type trusts where you're trying to get assets out of your name so that when you have to qualify for Medicaid, you haven't essentially become destitute. As we all know, you're only allowed to have $2,000 worth of assets under your name in order to qualify for Medicaid in New Jersey. If you have charitable-minded intentions, if you are a solo ager who does not have children or family that you're looking to leave any assets to, you can create charitable trusts under your will, or you can actually create charitable trusts during your lifetime that you irrevocably remove assets to the charitable trust and get a tax deduction for those assets and still retain an income stream from the trust to you until your death, where then it pays out to that charity. So there's so many instruments out there that you can look to help plan for your future, make sure that you still have enough income to manage your affairs and to take care of you for your lifetime, and then it lasts for your lifetime. What are the benefits of a trust? You have potential substantial tax benefits, assurance that the distribution of the assets under your designated beneficiaries are made according to the trust document, and therefore also not probate assets. They are not made public under a trust. It's a private document. Protection of the assets in the event of such situations as litigation and divorce, meaning that if there are trusts that you can create for each one, for each of your spouse for each of you. And then there can be provisions in there as for litigation or divorce. A lot of times trusts cannot be accessed by creditors because you make sure that those assets are not considered your assets. And there also, if you are leaving funds in trust for your children, that those funds that are in trust for your children do not name in their spouses. One, because there's a tax implication on that. They would become inheritance tax implications on that. But also, in the event that your child gets divorced, those assets are not part of the marital assets. So the funds that you leave for them are protected in the event that your child gets divorced. Providing for a loved one who may be unable or unfit responsibly manage the money. So if you have a child who either has a drug problem or has mental illness or is incapacitated in any other way, physically or mentally, you can create a special needs trust under your will to take care of them and also preserve their benefits if they are receiving benefits currently from the state. So there's special need trusts, D4A trusts that you can create under your will. Those trusts, the benefit of those trusts is that while they do preserve the benefits and they're able to stay on Medicaid, that money is not a payback to Medicaid. So those funds can be, on the death of your child, can be either appointed by them in their will or go out to their heirs or anybody you designate in the trust. So those are, there's a lot of things you can do under a trust that give you a little bit more control. The availability of the assets to beneficiaries for such needs as education expenses, living expenses, and healthcare, because you can designate what the funds within the trust can be utilized for. You decide whether or not it's going to be used for everyday expenses or if they're only supposed to use it for certain types of expenses. So just a little bit about us. We are a corporate trustee. There's two different types of trustees that you would have and who would handle your trust, the corporate or the individual. An individual is usually a family member, a guardian, or a friend. They're held to a lower fiduciary standard than we are as a corporate fiduciary because we're expected to know the rules, know how to handle a trust, and know the types of things that would be considered a breach of trust. There's pros and cons of both. The corporate specializes in proper management of the trust, as I said, held to a higher fiduciary standard. They make decisions on an unbiased, rational decision-making process. So a lot of the clients that come to us, oftentimes they are siblings of a brother or sister who, under their parents' trust, they were named as the trustee, and now their relationship is in tatters because they were put in charge of their sister or their brother's money, and they no longer want that responsibility because it has, had a terrible effect on their family situation. So you want to consider that in terms of under your will, if you're going to name your daughter in charge of your son's trust, because your daughter knows how to handle her finances and your son does not. And unfortunately, that doesn't usually lead to a lot of love and care between the two siblings. So it's another reason to consider using a corporate trustee. So with that, I think I could open it up to any questions that anybody might have with regard to whether some of the things that we discussed.
Can you hear me, Siobhan?
I can.
Okay. All right. So one of the questions that came in through the chat is, what would be an example of a conservative investment for a senior citizen or someone with limited income?
Okay. So you want to think about, what, if you're going to put something in a conservative investment, it has to be money that you're not going to need in the short term. So, within your income needs and that you've been able to establish also at that time that you have some sort of cash reserve available to yourself. Those are the things that you want to take care of first, making sure that you have enough money if your car broke down, or if you had to buy a new refrigerator tomorrow. Those kinds of things, you want to make sure that you have enough cash reserve before you think about putting something in a longer term investment. However, once you do make that and you do have enough money that you'd like to invest, you want to consider doing something such as a mutual fund. I know CDs were popular, but you're not going to do very well with a CD right now. The rates are just so low, especially if you're not going to put it in a very long-term CD. So what I would recommend is thinking about mutual funds and going with very low cost type mutual funds. Vanguard is a wonderful place to go look. Look on their website and see the various options that they have there. When you're talking about a mutual fund gives you, you can do index investing under a mutual fund, or you can do sector investing, which means it's a type, well, it's value or growth type investing within a mutual fund. But a mutual fund gives you exposure to such a much larger amount of stocks in a bucket that allow you diversification and some hedging your risk when you invest in a mutual fund. A mutual fund is not going to go skyrocketing up and down on a quick basis. It's a very gradual, usually upward way to make money within the mutual fund. So those are the safer type investments to do if you're going to get your feet wet a little bit. And I think what you'd have to go out and do is you do your due diligence and your research. Go to a Vanguard or Charles Schwab, which has very low cost internal costs for your investing there. And they have platforms and minimums, very low minimums for you to be able to open an account, put money in, and those platforms are and they also have people, the 800 number, that will help you open the account, that will help you with no cost to yourself, get money into that account and look at the various vehicles that you might want to invest in.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, I see that Dr. Eisenberg actually made it. So, Siobhan, I thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate your, giving us a little bit of extra wisdom this afternoon. Sure. And again, we will have Siobhan's contact information posted at the end of our Lunch and Learn, as well as in a link that we will forward later on this week. So again, thank you to Siobhan Connolly. And thank you, Siobhan. I will invite Dr. Eisenberg to come on screen with us, and Siobhan just needs to stop sharing her screen.
Yep.
Okay. Come back on. Dr. Eisenberg, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm trying to share. It says the host won't let me start the video. So
there you go.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us. We'll do our intros later, so I'll let you have the floor.
What did you say?
I'll let you have the floor. Go ahead, Dr. Eisenberg.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry for the delay. I was going from one hospital to another and got a little bit delayed. My talk is something that I've done for the past 16 years. Just a little bit about myself. I'm not your typical heart doctor. I've been a board certified cholesterol specialist. We call ourselves lipidologists. Since 2004, the organization is such that across the entire world now, there are people that are available to you to be able to look at it, what outside the box type of approach. In other words, as I tell patients when they come into the office the first time, regardless of what their issues are, the 5 things that you think you know about life and death, you can pretty much throw in the trash can. And similar things like your total cholesterol, which is what I'm going to talk about today, your EKG, your stress tests, the differences between men and women, and your family history. And I certainly can't go into, I could go into each separately, that's how much there is data available for every doctor to be able to kind of separate out your risk from low or none to very, very high risk. So when I use the quote, I don't care about your total cholesterol, or neither should you, it's simply to say that the total cholesterol, while it may be elevated and allow your doctor to go search for other reasons or other risks, if you will, it in and of itself, the number doesn't necessarily reflect how bad. I am an emergency as well as an elective invasive heart doctor, and I can certainly tell you after 25 years that the average cholesterol when somebody has a heart attack, when somebody comes in and gets a stent or a bypass open heart surgery, or unfortunately has cardiac arrest, the average cholesterol, bad cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol, is only about 130 to 150. And the total cholesterol is considered between 200 and 240, which would be considered average cholesterol. So that while the number in the old days used to make the primary care doctors and a lot of my own colleagues make you want to give you a medication to lower cholesterol, statins being the most common and the most proven in terms of life and death, the bottom line is that there's a lot more involved. All a total cholesterol greater than 240 does is say, look for something else that's causing it. And in reality, a doctor a very long time ago, when we were drawing blood, calculated like an algebraic equation your bad cholesterol from your total cholesterol, your good cholesterol, the HDL, and your triglyceride, literally like an algebraic equation. Total cholesterol equals your bad cholesterol minus your triglycerides over a number plus your good cholesterol over a number, and we solve for that equation. It's not a very accurate system. Around 2003, we developed systems, one using the nuclear magnetic resonance, just like an MRI, as well as another test using ultra centrifuge, if you will, spinning and spinning and spinning, to allow us to actually and accurately measure each of the parameters of your cholesterol. So again, we can get a direct number of that cholesterol, and that actually allows us a more accurate way to predict problems. We know that the higher the bad cholesterol is, not the good or the triglycerides and the total, simply the bad, and it's been in place for over 13 years now. For every 10 points above each goal, each person's goal, the risk of developing disease in one's arteries from head to toe goes up. Now, we have, as of 2018, worldwide recommendations, and there's goals, less than 130, less than 100, less than 70, less than 55, and even less than 40 now for people who either have recurrent events, a lot of disease that's documented, or somebody that doesn't have any disease yet, and we're trying to prevent that from occurring. So we have all this in place. But what's really interesting is people come to me every day and say, this doctor says I need to be on Lipitor, I need to be on Crestor, I need to be on Zocor. I heard that you can tell me a little bit more of whether or not I really need to be on that medication. And the answer is yes, because as I tell patients, other than the 5 things you think you know, also the punishment has to fit the crime, so that it's not just the number. We just don't treat numbers, we treat people. And if we have evidence by scans, ultrasounds of your neck, scans of your heart, scans of your legs, where there is disease, that's what I call an axe murderer. People that have no plaque anywhere, that's what I call a shoplifter. So you see, the total cholesterol doesn't tell us anything about disease, presence or absence of that. It doesn't tell us whether or not we need to just be taking a medication willy-nilly. If we start doing scans, and we do them a lot in my practice, we get to tell our patients, the punishment fits the crime, guilty or not guilty, so to speak. In addition, the past 17 years, when I was talking about using MRI literally to measure your blood, or centrifuging, ultracentrifuging the blood to measure the blood directly, not just calculated with an equation, which is the everyday that you get. There are a host of a number of other entities that run alongside that bad cholesterol that can be checked. Now, the downside is, if I was having this discussion prior to 2010 and definitely prior to 2014, everyone could get covered for that. It didn't matter about Medicare, and it didn't matter about which insurance you had. Unfortunately, since 2014, it's now become about your insurance and whether or not they will cover. And some insurances will cover and some won't. And I tell my patients, they're going to tell you from the onset of whether or not these tests are covered. Well, what tests? Well, we can be born, and if we have multiple family members on one side of the family, so we have different generations, we have a grandfather, we have an aunt and uncle, we have a brother and sister, we have multiple lineages of disease, heart attacks, strokes, bypasses, stents, carotid surgeries, peripheral leg surgeries, multiple members. We can be born with an extra particle that kind of runs alongside the bad cholesterol, much more, or the potential to be much more malignant than just the bad cholesterol itself. For all intents and purposes, you could call it the little a particle. I kind of call it bad cholesterol's evil twin brother. But the bottom line is that this has been studied since 2002. It's been available for doctors all across the entire world to be able to catch early these people that have that particular extra particle, and we treat that much more aggressively. I have been doing such since it was discovered. It works. In addition, we can be born with an abnormal vascular gene. Now, that vascular gene is such that for some people, for most people on the planet, 7.5 billion, you are who you're born to. Okay, that's about 70 to 75%. And what that means is, if there's a lot of family members, you have a 3/4 of a chance, 75% chance that you can inherit that. Doesn't mean you're going to prematurely before 55. And there's a 50% chance it might be between 50 and 70. But there's also a 25% chance that every other member of the family can have an issue and you don't have to have anything at all. Which is why I say again that there are people that come to me just because they have a high cholesterol, and it doesn't necessarily mean everybody gets a pill or everybody gets told you need medication. We always try to tell you to eat right and exercise and lose weight because it's all adjunctive. Lifestyle matters. But the other 20 to 25% can be born with a vascular predisposition to developing heart disease, stroke, and even dementia. Anywhere from 25 to 75% of that population, 20 to 25% of 7.5 billion people, where, believe it or not, all the pills in China won't help. It's all about, number one, exercise, and we're talking 30 minutes minimum 5 days a week, starting as early as possible. And in addition, of course, keeping your blood pressure controlled, your sugar controlled, your cholesterol controlled, and not smoking. These are all the Fab Five, as I call it. So the bottom line is that there's a lot more than just the total cholesterol that you have to take into account. And I don't care whether you're 20, and I don't care whether you're 70 or older. Once we get around 80, it becomes less of an issue, and wear and tear, if you will, becomes more of a problem. That's why people that don't have any issues up till 80 years of age not recommended to take extensive and harmful medications as much, because that actually shortens the lifespan and is well proven. If you have issues already, we continue those medications because they will continue to reduce your risk. So it's not a one-size-fits-all process here. The total doesn't necessarily help you. The ratios don't necessarily help you. The good cholesterol, forget that. Women in good cholesterol, that's out the window almost 15 years now. Triglycerides, they can be a separate issue. They are a form of fat that's more about your sugar metabolism than it is about your bad fat metabolism. Do they work hand in hand? Yes, they do. People with high bad cholesterol and high triglycerides, they have another entity. I don't want to get off the track here, but of course, we cholesterol doctors will look at that and treat as such for each person. But the main focus should always be on your bad cholesterol, not the total. We shouldn't be prescribing you anything for a total cholesterol. We shouldn't be looking at the good and the triglycerides and the ratios anymore. All of that is done. It may work for the insurance companies, but it's not going to work from head to toe. Where there's smoke, there's fire, to prevent illness and disease and events from the time that you walk into a doctor's office and want to establish a risk. So what we've created, and I say we because cholesterol specialists are across the globe now, and we've been meeting, there's literally in the United States, we've been meeting 4 times a year up until COVID to discuss the guidelines that doctors and healthcare professionals of all types should follow when you walk into an office and say, am I at risk? I mean, because that's the end result. And as I say to patients, after I talk about the 5 things that you think you know and are wrong, and after I talk about the differences in cholesterol and the extra things that run alongside that you need to check, and I'll add a couple more in a second, the last thing is prevention. If you've had something happen, let's not happen again. We call that secondary prevention. If it's never happened before, can you prevent it by lifestyle modification and detecting if there's a genetic predisposition? Absolutely you can. Trust me, I've done it for a long time. So it's important to understand that. In addition to the cholesterol aspects, because again, this total cholesterol just allows us to go forward and look at everything else. So we're going to look at certain cholesterol entities, as I just discussed, but there's non-cholesterol entities that you need to know about. So 2 more, just to add a little bit more to this, is one is called inflammation. It's where your own body, for all intents and purposes, at the vascular level, turns against you. So that plaque in your arteries, if you will, can progress and get worse, and can become unstable from being stable without having very high cholesterol, and without smoking, and without having uncontrolled high blood pressure, and even being overweight. Your own body you could be very skinny and exercise every day, and we all know of cases where somebody just unfortunately has cardiac arrest and doesn't survive. It happens. It does happen. And that's another entity, if you will. The last entity is what you would call prediabetes. Now that, again, works to be about, at least in the United States, 30 to 50 million people a year walk around with what we would call prediabetes. Your metabolism, it matters where your ethnic background is, and it matters, again, what your weight and your diet and your predisposition. All of these things add up, say in a 33, 33, and a 33. The cholesterol, the inflammation, and your metabolism. So if you look at it that way, in a very short time, hopefully I have opened some eyes for those that are listening to all the other things that are out there that people that physicians that are well trained know how to look if you've already had events, we can say, well, and you keep on having events. I always say that if it keeps on happening, somebody's missing something. Okay, it's not just about telling you to eat right and exercise. There's other entities, as I just discussed, that we can look at to try to help stem the tide, decrease the progression, reduce events. Number one, and if it's never happened before, kind of give you a guideline, an outline, or a map that allows you to not have these events happen. Get to it before it gets to you. So, in summary, your total cholesterol, I don't care about it, neither should you, in terms of your survival. Of course, if it's elevated, we should now, it's like taking a look at the car. You can look around at the tires, but unless you open up the hood and look at the parts, you don't necessarily know if there's a problem driving the car. So hopefully that gives those that are listening some new thoughts and new ideas how to take charge of your own life and go to your physicians and say, I want some more answers than just, here, give me the Lipitor, generic Crestor, et cetera. Because by the way, in general, for the past 20 years, and we summarized this in 2007 at one of these large meetings, the best that a medication can do by and of itself is 30% less fatal and non-fatal events like strokes and heart attacks. Better than zero, of course, but there's so much more to it than that. And that's why people like cholesterol specialists, whether they be endocrinologists, cardiologists, nurse practitioners, primary care doctors, and I've worked with all of them, we all try to just say that there's another whole level of prevention and wellness that you could obtain. And that's why we try to do this every single day in our practices. So, you may not have ever heard of any of these issues or any of these entities going forward, but now I've enlightened you a little bit, and certainly urge you to go look into these things yourself if you have any possible risk from that standpoint. That's my little talk, and I certainly welcome any questions at this time. Thank you so much for listening.
Hi, Dr. Eisenberg. It's Mary Beth. So you certainly have given us some excellent food for thought. I do have a couple of questions in here. Could you possibly just recap what the 5 preventions or 5 ways to manage your cholesterol? I think I wrote a couple of them down: watching blood pressure, exercise, but could you just go over those again?
Well, no, that's when we look at predisposition. Unfortunately, if you take 7.5 billion people, over 70%, you are who you're born to genetically in terms of vascular disease. And then the remainder, 20 to 25%, and of course there's an overlap. People can be born with, because you get a gene from your mother and you get a gene from your father, so that there's an overlap. But there's people that are just all about what you weigh, what you eat, and what you do in terms of your activity. Most important is the activity level. In terms of developing dementia by 70, having a stroke by 70, or having a heart attack by 70, there are people that are specifically predispositioned that their lifestyle is more important than taking a statin or another medication just to lower their cholesterol down. And of course, there are people that need both. There's absolutely people that are in overlap, and that's still a lot of people in, if you take a look at 15 to 20% of 7 billion people, that's a lot of people. So we treat all 3. When we look at it, we know we can't just give the medication and say, don't worry about the rest of it. And when we tell somebody about lifestyle, we have to treat, as I said, the punishment fits the crime. So it's the 3 major issues are the cholesterol and other entities that ride along with cholesterol, something called inflammation, or the body's immune system that attacks plaque and causes it to be unstable, and then the pre-diabetes section. When I talked about the 5 things you think it's about the EKG can be normal and we can have all the disease in the world. The stress test can miss 20 to 30% with normal stress tests, and it can be the worst stress test in the world and you can have no issues whatsoever. I talked about the cholesterol in detail. When I talk about men and women, I say they're not from Mars and Venus like the silly book. they're from different galaxies, how women develop disease in their arteries and present with disease in their arteries and respond to treatment is completely and categorically different. And that's been that way since 2004. And then lastly, family history. Everybody can have serious issues and illnesses at 50 and you can live to 100 and vice versa. So that's what I meant by the 5 things.
Okay. All right. We also have a question about statins and dementia.
Sure. So the national, the American Clinical Lipid Specialists, which is what the American Board of Clinical Lipid Specialists, which is what we are called, they did an entire review of all the neurologic complications with statins. They found in the end that after all the other variables were out, that there's no direct correlation with statins and dementia. Now, that being said, and I've been one for a long time, specifically with atorvastatin, which is Lipitor, and not the other ones, the way it works, and because of the way it crosses, when you take a statin, there are only 2 types of statins. Ones that are water soluble, and they're not very potent, and they don't cross what we call the blood-brain barrier, and ones that are lipid soluble or fat soluble, of which Lipitor being the strongest one. Okay, so are there cases of dose-dependent, 10 milligrams, 20 milligrams, 40 milligrams, and 80 milligrams, where there appears to be confusion, appears to be memory loss with atorvastatin specifically? Yes. Have I seen it? Yes. Does it go away when we remove the atorvastatin, change to another? Yes. So they're not permanent damage, and it's dose dependent, and that goes for muscle issues and liver issues as well. But when the dust settled and they looked at case by case, thousands by thousands, millions by millions, in terms of the neurologic issues with statins, they found no specific correlation with statins. Long-winded, but I got to be long-winded when I answered that question.
Okay. Well, I thank you very much. I'm so glad you were able to make it today. I didn't really give it a proper introduction. So Dr. Eisenberg, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm glad your emergency, hopefully,
my pleasure.
Okay. And hopefully.
Well, it's just going from one hospital to the other, but glad I could make it in time. And certainly I'm here. I'm available if there are a couple other questions to answer before they call me for. I moved it to 2:00 if there's anything else. But
I do have another question. If a 78-year-old has a heart rate of 46, is this considered a problem?
Good question. I get that all the time. Just like the cholesterol, we don't treat a number, we treat a patient. So if you look at the most popular person who has a heart rate of 40, regardless of whether he may be disgraced now, Lance Armstrong, and all of those bike races that he did, his resting heart rate was always shown to be 40. Well, we're certainly not going to put a pacemaker in somebody with a heart rate of 40. We watch that. If there are events, if there's dizziness, passing out, near passing out, severe fatigue, weight gain, swelling, that is directly linked to a slow heart rate, that's cause for an alarm. When we see a slow heart rate, the first thing we'll do is put somebody on an event monitor and watch to see if there's worsening than that 46 for that patient. So that what we look at is to see if there's a normal beat to beat, the first sound and the second sound, bump, 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 bump. Because if there's periods of time where there's no heartbeat, in addition to somebody having a heart rate of 46, that's cause for more concern and worry to move forward, to maybe consider putting a pacemaker in. The first thing we do, and it happens weekly most of the time, at least after doing this for so long, it happened just in the past 7 days for me. The first thing we do is look at medications that actually slow the heart rate down that you were taking for a long period of time, medications such as beta blockers for high blood pressure or for heart attacks or for heart failure, or something called calcium channel blockers, which are also for irregular rhythms to keep the heart rate down, as well as for blood pressure. These medications, those two classes of medications, tend to slow the heart, so that the first thing I will do is change those medications to ones that don't slow the heart rate down if it's for blood pressure, or stop it all completely if it's not for high blood pressure, and see if the heart rate just comes up. Many people will end up in the hospital with a heart rate in the 40s. They're dizzy, they're tired. The first thing we do is not just put the pacemaker in, is we stop the medication and let the beta blockers take anywhere from 48 to 72 hours to wear off, and the calcium channel blockers 24 hours. So we'll stop those first and see if the heart rate comes up. Sometimes we'll even put the patient on a treadmill and see if the heart rate goes up accordingly, showing that it's a normal system. They just, as they get older, between 70, 80, have a slowing down. There is the batteries wear out, but they're not necessarily ready to be replaced. And that would be with a new battery called a pacemaker. So the bottom line is that you don't treat a number. You treat a patient. You treat the symptoms. You see if there's any underlying worsening than that 46, and you look at the medications. All three things should be done if somebody walked into my office.
Big picture. Everything is big. It's got to take everything into consideration.
Everything is a big picture.
Everything.
You treat every single patient as an individual, not as a textbook and not as a class effect. You can't do that. You just can't.
Good advice for everyone, regardless of what specialist you're going
Absolutely.
to.
You got to hold your doctor to it. You got to hold your doctors to all of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They should always be held accountable for that.
Have an open dialogue with your
Anything
physicians.
else?
That's one thing we talk about at SCAN all the time to our members. Open dialogue. You got to talk about everything. So big picture.
There's a guy named Cy Sims. I used to say the great poet and philosopher. If anybody knows, I'm making a joke. The educated consumer is the best customer. He was a clothing guy from New York, but I always say that you gotta arm yourself, right? You gotta arm yourself with knowledge, and you gotta ask the question. You do.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Eisenberg, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. And again, we will always
Pleasure.
all of our presenters' contact information at the end of our lunch and learn. So again, thank you.
Absolutely. And if you have other topics and you want to invite me back, I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you so much. So Andrea, my co-host, I'm going to invite you to come back on with me. Hello, Andrea.
Hello, Dr. Eisenberg.
Hello there.
Well, I thank everyone for joining us today. We had two wonderful presentations. Andrea, I know you wanted to share, and it's wonderful Dr. Eisenberg mentioned about diabetes and being pre-diabetic. So
yeah, we have a few announcements, and I think I'll do that one first. So you know that SCAN has a 6-week workshop. We do this periodically on diabetes self-management. It's free. It's open to anyone who's 60 and over, which somehow I'm thinking it's everyone who's listening. Just a lucky guess. We're doing this on Mondays. We're doing a day session and an evening session. It's going to start on November 9th. It's going to go through December 14th. And if you want to register for this, again, free, everything is free. You can call our office, 732-542-1326. You don't have to memorize anything, because when we send you our little follow-up note, we will absolutely put this information out there. But it is apropos to Dr. Eisenberg today talking about diabetes. This workshop is good if you have diabetes, if you're pre-diabetic, or even if you're a caretaker or you know people who have diabetes and you just want to learn a little bit more about nutrition. Coincidentally, the facilitators happen to be me and Mary Beth. Here we are. So yeah, so there's that. But we have a couple other things to share. Let's see.
I know, I feel like I'm drawing a blank. I knew there was some.
Oh, yeah. You know what? Going back to Siobhan Connolly from Garden State Trust, you know, one of the things that she spoke about extensively was lowering some of your costs. And one way you might consider doing that is SCAN has something called the Benefits Enrollment Center, or we just call it the BEC. And this is an opportunity for all seniors to get eligible seniors. I want to say 65 and above, if you're on Medicare or even if you're younger and you're disabled. But it's an opportunity to meet with our benefits specialists and get a free screening, because there are very possibly some things that are out there that you are entitled to receive a reduction on, or a benefit that you didn't even know about. And what good is the benefit if you don't know about it? So you know what, Mary Beth, we'll put that in the follow-up email as well. But that, again, you can just call the office. Wendy's going to get a lot of phone calls, but she will steer you in the right direction.
And the information is up on our website as well,
Yes.
if you want to check it out. And I'm just going to screen share just so that they have the contact info.
Oh, yes. Okay, please do.
Our
Okay.
presenters. Okay.
And I want to share one more thing with you, one more coming event. Again, it'll be in the email, but I'll just kind of tease you a little bit. We've started a new little adventure at SCAN, a new virtual kind of an event. It's called Creative Conversations, where we bring different artists out, all different types of artists, to have a conversation. And you know what? Again, these are all free things. Our first event for Creative Conversations will be November 5th. And we're speaking to a gentleman. His name is Dennis Farrell. He's from Brooklyn, and he is a mozzarella cheese maker. Very interesting. So art, this is more like the art of Italian cooking. You know, art comes in many forms. And I think this is really going to be a lot of fun, because this is meant to be fun and educational. It's November 5th from 4 to 5. We'll send out the registration link and a little more info. I'm hoping that some of you will join us for that as well.
And earlier that day is our next Lunch and Learn, which is November 5th from 12:30 to 1:30. Busy November. And I think finally, we just want to also share, if anyone would like to join us on Tuesday night, SCAN is having their virtual annual awards presentation. Our honorees are five wonderful organizations that have made a huge impact on the community during COVID-19. So a link to that is also going to be up on our homepage. If anyone wants to join us, it's free, and it's an event that we host every year, and everyone can now participate because it's virtual.
Right. And we're paying tribute to all of our healthcare heroes. Let's see, Monmouth Medical Center, Jersey Shore University, Centra State, Interfaith Neighbors, and
Freehold Coalition of Health. I always get that wrong.
Freehold Neighborhood Coalition for Health, a long name, but 5 awesome organizations that absolutely went above and beyond. They're still going above and beyond. And this year we're paying tribute really to the staff members of all of those organizations, because, hey, they did all the work, right? So this year they get the glory. Yeah. Okay.
Thank everyone for their time.
Thank
Thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon.
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 Bye, everyone.
Have a good afternoon. Bye, everyone.